Hello, welcome back to your virtual field trip here at the Ken Sealing Waterloo Region Museum. We'd like you to keep thinking about what life was like in Canada and in Waterloo Region about 100 to 200 years ago. Now we're back in our blacksmith shop today and we're going to be talking a bit about materials. If you were transported back to that time period suddenly now, there's a lot of things that would seem very different to you. The way people talked, the way people would act, the kind of things that they would do and say, the way they lived. Something that might stick out to you that might not be the first thing on your mind is how different everything looked. Not just because of the way that people did things back then, but because of what things were made out of. There's a lot of things in our homes and in our lives that are made out of all kinds of different materials. And there would have been a lot of materials that we use today that would have been very similar back then, and some that are very different.
If you had access to wood that came from a sawmill, you'd be getting your wood in straight planks and boards cut to different lengths and sizes that you could use for your fences, your houses, and for lots of other things. If you didn't have access to wood from a sawmill, you might have to use logs for log cabins, cedar rails for fences, or other wood that wasn't quite as cleanly cut. If you could get bricks from a brickyard, you'd be able to use those to build your houses and other structures with nice, straight, even layers and angles. This lets you build things that might be taller, that might be stronger, because the structure will be a little more regular, and it's going to change the look of your buildings and of your whole community. If you didn't have access to bricks, you might have to use stone instead. Quite often farmers would plow up field stone like this, and use it to build their houses and some more permanent structures. Just because it's not as regular as brick doesn't mean that it's bad. Stone is stronger and can hold a heavy weight, so it works well for foundations, things that are taking the weight of the whole building above them.
Now, what materials people had and what they made things with would largely depend on what they had access to. So if you had a community that was near a railway line or a harbor, it would be easier for you to get things brought into your community. You might be able to bring in different materials from further away for cheaper, maybe at different qualities, maybe better qualities. But if you were a small community that was a little further out, was harder to get to, it'd be harder for you to get these things and they'd probably be more expensive. It could also depend on how much money your community had. If you were a wealthy community, you might have access to the nicest materials, things that are more expensive, things that are fancier, prettier, maybe work better. If you're in a poorer community, you might have to make do with recycling materials or bringing in materials at a higher cost because they had to travel further.
A good example of this is steel. Steel could be ordered from a steel mill in different sizes and thicknesses that the blacksmith could use for their work. If you were near rail lines or other transportation, you could bring the steel in whatever size you needed, which would make it easier for you to do your work because you wouldn't have to worry about finding old pieces of scrap that were close enough to the right size or that you had to work longer and harder to get it to do the job you need. If you didn't have access to steel from the steel mill, the blacksmith is going to have to spend a lot more time and energy making the scrap pieces of his materials work for the job that he needs to get done. This is going to take more time. It also might make it harder to make as good of a quality product. The same could be said of leather. Leather is made in tanneries, which are large operations which most small towns wouldn't have on their own. Leather is going to have to be brought into your community, and it can be in different thicknesses, sizes, grades, and qualities before the harness maker works with it. But if you didn't have access to new leather, you might have to recycle old pieces of leather or just repair damaged pieces of harness as best you could.
Now, if you were to take a look around your house today, you're probably going to find all kinds of things made out of some of the materials that we've just talked about. You might not find as many of them, they might not be used for the same things, but you'll probably still find a lot of things made out of metal, wood, leather, things like that. I'd like to invite you, as a challenge, to try to think up some of the other materials that you have in your house. Make a list of any materials you can think of that are in the objects in your house, from what makes up your bed to what's making up the tools in your garage, to what's making up your computer or your TV at home. Maybe try to write down a list of all these things, all the different kinds of materials you might find, glass, plastic, wood, metal, whatever you can find. Maybe also take a look to see if you can see where these things were made and where these products and materials might have come from. So thanks very much for watching, and we hope to see you again soon here at the Ken Sealing Waterloo Region Museum. Bye!